The next little morsel of theory that I want to throw at you guys has to do with what we call emotional thresholds. And so we discussed earlier in the obedience section about doorways and thresholds, and that's something totally different than what we're talking about right now. So right now what we want to discuss is what we consider to be emotional thresholds. And what we mean by that is the point at which the dog starts shifting in emotional state. So essentially, for our purposes, it's the point at which the dog goes from being sort of calm, cool, collected, and content to all of a sudden becoming nervous and tense and closer to that state of full-blown arousal and explosion. So these emotional thresholds are going to be really important to begin to recognize for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is that we always want to be working our dogs right around that threshold point or slightly below it as we're dealing with some of these reactive scenarios and dealing with some of these setups that we're going to be doing. So we want to figure out what are the signs that our dog is reaching that threshold point. This is going to be closely tied to cutoff cues, but slightly different. And then recognize when we might need to just sort of stop any forward progression or back up a little bit, or maybe try and adjust things a little bit for next time. The reason that this is so important and the reason that it's different from cutoff cues is because we may encounter scenarios where we're, for instance, approaching another dog and our dog sees it and we can tell they're kind of cueing in, but they're not making any changes, right? They're not showing a cutoff cue, they're not getting more aroused, they're just sort of there. And that's what we mean by their threshold point. And sometimes it makes sense for us to just stop there and hang out for a moment and give our dogs a second to make a decision because they're sort of teetering on the fence. And then there's of course going to be ways that we can help them to make the right decision, and that's going to tie into our manufacturing cutoff cues concept that we're going to be playing with a little bit later on in this module. So again, the key thing here is that we want to learn to recognize our own dog's emotional thresholds, and it may vary a little bit from dog to dog what exactly it looks like. But when we talk about emotional threshold, what we're ultimately referring to is that sort of like that line in the sand that if you were to go any further, things could really start going downhill. But if you stay back behind that line, you can sort of keep things under control and continue to work with your dog and help them through the process.